Hey there everybody, Sage Popham here, founder of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. And what exactly does the word tonic mean? You know, this is a word that we see used a lot in herbal medicine and in the alternative health world. You know, we hear about health tonics and rejuvenative tonics and nutritive tonics and bitter tonics and chi tonics, and the word tonic gets used a lot, and I think this is one of those terms in Western herbalism, or herbalism as a whole really, that can really use a little bit of clarification to make sure that we're all on the same page when we use that word. So a question came up in a recent Q&A session with my students, and around, what's the difference between, a tonic from the perspective of physiomedicalism versus, the way the word tonic is used in, say, Ayurvedic medicine or Chinese medicine. So that is what the topic for this video is, and hopefully it provides some clarity for you on what is oftentimes a little bit of a nebulous term. Question number 1 is coming to us from Stephen Roberts in the Alchemical Herbalism program. And Stephen is asking, are the physiomedicalists' use of the term tonic and the Ayurveda rasayana for the most part interchangeable in your view? If not, could you share some situations that might highlight where they do not correlate that well? That's a really great question, Stephen. And it really brings me to the kind of a conversation about the word tonic and what the word tonic means. It's in Western herbalism a pretty loose, nebulous term that I find being used in a wide variety of contexts. And depending on those contexts, the word has a very different meaning. So I'd like to define this term tonic a little bit and kind of elucidate a little bit of those different contexts so we can understand what this word actually means. So oftentimes we'll see the word tonic be used alongside something like a bitter tonic or a nutritive tonic or a rejuvenating tonic, or just a tonic herb. And oftentimes those really all mean very different things. And so to me, like when I think of the word tonic, I really like etymology, right? I really like thinking about the roots of words and how those roots of words correlate to other words, and through understanding other words that are related to one another, I think we can get a better sense for what they actually mean. And so if we look at the word tonic, the root of that word is tone, right? Tone. And when in the context of herbalism, when we're looking at tone, we're looking at the tonal quality of a tissue, which really is looking at how tight is it or how relaxed is it. And this is one of our kind of polarities that we see in terms of herbal energetics. Oftentimes we just look at temperature and moisture of hot and cold and wet and dry, and it's very common to overlook the tonal aspect. And that really is what makes up the 6 tissue states of the physiomedicalist, like you're mentioning here. So you have like heat excitation and cold depression in terms of temperature. You have damp stagnation and dry atrophy in terms of moisture. And then you have tension and relaxation in terms of tissue tone. And tension and relaxation are really, really important to consider when we're looking at a tissue. It's not always pertinent, but when it is, it's really pertinent, right? And you got to really address it, because if the root cause of an imbalance is due to the tone of a tissue, it's not going to be corrected just by attending to hot, cold, wet, and dry, right? So this is a very good understanding to have about the energetics of the tissues, and conversely, what remedies we want to apply. So So just a little background on the word tone, and now thinking of the word tonic, right? What we see here is that it's going to increase the tone of the tissue, meaning it's going to tighten up the tissue. It's going to provide firmness and stability, tensile strength to the tissue. And this is really the opposite of a relaxant, right? Which is going to relax constriction and tension or spasm. So our relaxants, more often than not, are things like nervines and antispasmodics. And then our tonics in this context are going to be our astringents, right? And that's really the way, the way I learned from Paul Bergner is that, he kind of combines those words together, that it's a tonic astringent. And it's helpful to combine those two words so we really know, so people really understand what we mean when we say the word tonic within that context. And I think that is really the way that is best to understand that term tonic according to traditional Western herbalism. Now, at the same time, in Western herbalism, that word tonic is also used in the context of a bitter. And, the way that we see a lot of bitter remedies working through the mucosal membranes, especially in the digestive system, but a lot of them are working on the mucosa in general. And so kind of a mucosal membrane tonic action as a bitter, but also in the way that a bitter remedy is going to increase digestion and increase absorption. It's going to bring more nutrients into the body and kind of replenish the system in that way, simply by bringing more nourishment. And so this is where we get into some different ways of looking at the word tonic, and more of, I would say, kind of more of like a building up and strengthening of the person. And so we see two sides of that. We see a bitter tonic through enhancing digestion and absorption. And on the other side of that, we see it as a nutritive tonic, which would be our, the remedies that kind of stand at the boundary between an herb and a food. And so these are typically our very mineral rich, nutrient dense plants that we take oftentimes as, strong infusions to just fill in nutrient gaps and provide just bulk nutrition, right? And a lot of those remedies being things like, nettle leaf and red raspberry and oat straw and alfalfa, right? These are all very mineral rich plants that just are providing bulk nutrition to the body. But at the same time, most of those plants are also astringent, right? Nettles, astringent, alfalfa, astringent, red raspberry, absolutely astringent, right? So many of the horsetail is another remedy in that category, also astringent. So while they are providing mineral nutrition, they are also working as a tonic astringent to tighten up those tissues. So that's kind of defining the word tonic in more within the context of Western herbalism. And when you see a Western herbalist use the word tonic, that's usually the way it's being referred to, right? So bitter tonic, nutritive tonic, or tonic astringent. I'm not so sure I like how nebulous that is, right? And it's like the same word being used to indicate very different things for the most part. But that it is what it is. So now you're also, kind of bringing in the comparison of the Ayurvedic term rasayana, which essentially means rejuvenative, a rejuvenation herb. Rasa has a lot of meanings in Ayurveda, but one of the definitions of rasa is it's like the juice, right? Or it's it's like the sap of the plant, or it's the, in terms of the dhatus or the 7 tissues of the body, that rasa is like our plasma. It's one of the first substances that is created from the absorption and digestion of physical material. So the plasma, I kind of think of it as like the extracellular fluid. And so they say rasayana, it's like the juice, it's a way of replenishing the essence, right? One teacher defined it as rasayana, like therapy is like the way of the juice, right? It's like, it's that when people are very weak and very deficient and very fatigued and they have, they're kind of wasting away and they don't have any vitality. We would traditionally use rasayana type herbs to replenish and rebuild and restore that weak and deficient person. In Chinese medicine, this would be, the closest equivalent to that would be something like what we would refer to as qi tonic herbs, right? So rasayana, qi tonic, is a very different category from what in the West we refer to as a tonic herb, right? Which again is oftentimes associated to like a bitter tonic or a nutritive tonic or a tonic astringent. In the East, that term tonic, or what is translated into the word tonic, is very different. The best term we have in Western herbalism that is most closely equivalent to rasayana or qi tonic herbs is adaptogens, right? And I think it's really interesting that in the West, we didn't really have a category for herbs to rejuvenate and replenish a weak, deficient vital force. And I think this raises some really interesting questions in terms of, in North America and Europe and where kind of Western herbalism originated and has been developed over the years, it's like, do we just not have those kinds of herbs? We got a few. We got our American ginseng, and we got, in the Northwest we've got Devil's Club, and there's a couple other plants. But for the most part, there's not a whole lot of plants that grow in the West, or what we might consider the West, as having this kind of property. And so it's kind of raises some interesting questions, right? Of, well, is that category not really present because there's no herbs that do that? Or do they all grow in the East? Or is it more that that wasn't a very important area of focus in the system of medicine? And this was, I remember one of my teachers at Bastyr talked about this, and they said, in the East, they oftentimes were treating a lot of deficiency type diseases, a lot of weakness, a lot of deficiency, a lot of emaciation, and needing to rebuild and rejuvenate people. And hence there's this whole kind of school of herbal medicine focused on rejuvenation. Whereas in the West, we tend to be a little more excessive, right? Eating too much rich foods and be getting toxic and, needing more to cleanse and purify the body, right? And so we see the alternative blood purifiers is kind of an area of herbalism that was a very large area of focus, right? I mean, Western herbalism for a really long time was just purging, right? We're going to make you vomit. We're going to make you sweat. We're going to make you poop. We're going to, bloodlet you, right? It was like all this kind of purging type therapies, or like heroic medicine. And so I think it brings up some interesting conversations in regards to, why is it that we haven't developed that orientation that much longer ago, right? I mean, we have it now in the adaptogen category, and I think there's still a lot more for us to learn about adaptogens and how to properly use them. I'm not going to get too much on my soapbox on that topic, but there is adaptogens are very popular plants these days, and a lot of times they're very misused. and can actually be damaging to people. They are not the cure-all panacea that everyone thinks they are. Someone's going to hate me for saying that, but it's true. And I'm saying this not from the perspective of a supplement company, from the perspective of a medicine maker, from the perspective of someone that is basically profiting by selling adaptogens, but I'm saying this from the perspective of a clinician that has seen damage done to people by misuse and abuse of adaptogen type plants. So we can't, adaptogen is a very new term in Western herbalism, and a lot of it is very much based on very reductionistic science on these plants, or more specifically particular constituents in the plants that have been isolated that work differently isolated than when in the whole plant. And then in light of that science, we tend to overlook and neglect the thousands of year old traditions that have used these plants and know these plants and understand how to properly and effectively administer them. So that's just, okay, I guess I did jump up on my adaptogen soapbox a little bit, but that's not the whole spiel. But I think it's just an important consideration that we really want to not neglect the traditions that really understand how to use those types of plants. So that is really my perspective here on the word tonic, and some of the different ways that we understand the word tonic in Western herbalism, and really how to differentiate that from the way in which some of these remedies or categories of remedies in the East have that word in there, rejuvenative tonic or chi tonic, and just how to make sure that we're really clear on what someone says. So I always ask when someone's like, oh yeah, this is a great tonic. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean when you say tonic? Are we just kind of throwing that word around without really knowing what it means? Or are we really using that word specifically and understanding what we mean when we say it? So I think it's really important to clarify those things when we're communicating amongst one another as herbalists, right? So that we're all on the same page and that we all have a good understanding of what we're all talking about. So great question, Stephen, and hopefully that helped clarify for you a little bit of the difference between our Western word tonic and some of the more Eastern definitions there of that word.